I was standing in the hallway, phone in my hand, my fingers trembling as I stared at the screen. The words on it blurred together, but it didn't matter anymore. The message was clear. My heart was racing, blood pounding in my ears. I couldn't move, couldn't think. My mind was too busy reeling from what had just happened. And then out of nowhere I heard it. The unmistakable sound of the front door slamming open. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. He was home early. My husband. A soft click of shoes against the hardwood floor. I didn't even turn to face him, couldn't bring myself to. I knew what was coming. I can't believe this. His voice, low and steady, echoed through the silence. Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. The weight of them, the meaning behind them, it was too much. My heart skipped a beat, then started pounding again, but now it felt like it was beating for a different reason. Fear. Guilt. It all rushed in at once. I stood there, rooted to the spot as the door clicked shut behind him. He didn't even raise his voice. His silence was worse than any shout could have been. I could feel his eyes on me, but I couldn't look up. I didn't know what to say. I didn't even know how to breathe. He didn't say a word. Just walked past me, his silence louder than any accusation. His steps echoed through the hallway as he disappeared into the living room, leaving me alone in the dim light, feeling like the air had been sucked out of the room. My heart was hammering in my chest, and for a moment I wondered if he could hear it, if he could feel it too. I couldn't move, couldn't even think straight. What had just happened? Was this really happening? I kept replaying that moment, the way he looked at me, the way his eyes seemed to know everything, but he didn't say anything. He didn't need to. My hands were shaking as I tried to steady myself, but all I could think about was him. The young man, the one who made my heart race in ways I hadn't felt in years. I couldn't escape the memories of the last time we were together. I slowly walked to my room, the weight of my own guilt hanging heavy on my shoulders. Could he really know? What was I supposed to do now? How could I fix this? I didn't have an answer. It had been a few days since that silent encounter, and everything seemed to return to normal, but something inside me was different. Every moment, every glance from my husband felt like a reminder of something I could never forget. But then, out of nowhere, I saw him again. It was a random meeting, a simple stroll down the street, but when our eyes locked, I felt a jolt like electricity rushing through me. His gaze was intense, like he knew every secret I'd tried to bury. "You haven't changed," he said, his voice smooth, almost a whisper. "You're still the same, just like before." His words settled into me, confusing me, making me question everything. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. Before I even knew what was happening, he stepped closer and his lips met mine. It was a kiss like nothing I'd ever experienced, deep, urgent, full of something forbidden. I didn't pull away. I couldn't. In that moment, everything else disappeared. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't know, was that this kiss would set in motion something far worse than I could have ever imagined. I came home late again, the house quiet and dark except for the dim light spilling from the kitchen. He was sitting at the table, a book in his hands, but his eyes weren't on the pages. They were on me. I could feel his gaze, sharp and questioning, but he said nothing. His silence felt heavier than any confrontation. My hands shook as I fumbled with my keys, trying to keep my composure, but I knew he noticed. I couldn't hide it anymore. I had no words, no excuse, nothing to explain what was happening inside me. The door closed behind me with a soft click, but the weight of the night pressed in from all sides. I couldn't stop thinking about him, the young man whose presence had become a constant pull in my mind, a magnetic force that I couldn't resist. The thought of him stirred something deep within me, something I couldn't ignore. How far would I let this go? My heart raced at the thought, and in the silence of the night I knew I couldn't go back. I couldn't undo what had already begun. He came home earlier than usual, the door creaking open just as I was finishing up dinner. He didn't look angry, didn't say anything about my late nights or my silence. He simply stepped inside, his tired eyes meeting mine with a kind of distance I hadn't noticed before. There was no confrontation, no questions. Just this oppressive silence hanging between us, a space too wide for comfort. I knew this was it, my last chance to fix things, to bring us back to what we used to be. Without thinking, I stepped toward him, my hands trembling as I cupped his face. The kiss was sudden, desperate, as if I could pull all the old love back from the depths of our past. But the moment our lips met, I knew. It wasn't the same. His lips were cold, unresponsive, like he was kissing a stranger. It hit me like a wave. This wasn't my husband anymore, not the man I once loved. How could I have not seen it sooner? And yet, I couldn't stop myself from wondering, how would you act if you were me? But deep down, I didn't want to know the answer. The next morning, I ran into him again. It was completely unplanned, but there he was, standing in the coffee shop doorway, his eyes fixed on me like he could see straight through all my attempts to hide what had happened. His gaze was intense, unyielding, and for a moment I felt exposed, like I couldn't breathe. He didn't say anything right away, just watched me, and then, as if he already knew, he spoke. "You want to be with him," he said softly, "but your soul can't. You want me." His words sliced through the air, making my knees weak. I didn't know how to respond. How did he know? How could he understand so completely? My heart began to race, a mix of guilt and something else. Something darker, more thrilling. I had been trying to fight it, to convince myself that I could still fix everything, but with each passing moment I could feel myself slipping further. Every step closer to him, every word he said, made it harder to deny what I knew deep down. I was already too far gone. This wasn't a mistake anymore. It was a choice I didn't know how to escape. Started with small things I couldn't explain. The way he would look at me, a lingering glance that made my stomach twist. He didn't ask questions, not yet, but I could feel it. The weight of his suspicion, the silent accusations that filled the space between us. It was as if he was watching, waiting for something to slip, but I couldn't tell what. And it terrified me. Every moment I spent with him, with my husband, felt like a lie, an endless charade I couldn't escape. The guilt gnawed at me, eating away at the fragile walls I had built around my heart. I didn't know where I was going anymore, didn't know how to stop the spiral I had set in motion. The more I tried to deny it, the more I knew it was pointless. Everything was unraveling, and all because I couldn't be honest. Then, out of nowhere, he appeared again, standing too close, his eyes searching mine, reminding me of the choice I had made. What if they saw us together? What would happen then? The thought lingered, suffocating me as I realized the danger was no longer just in my mind. It was real. I was standing in the kitchen, my mind a whirl of thoughts, when I glanced over at my grandson holding his toy gun. His movements were unsure, hesitant. It wasn't ideal for him to be playing with it, considering it was meant for older kids, but I didn't want to be too harsh. So I gently guided him, giving him a soft reminder that it was time to put it away. I told my step-grandson to leave it inside, I thought, watching as he quietly placed the toy back on the shelf and grabbed something more age-appropriate. But just as I exhaled, trying to regain some normalcy, the front door creaked open. It was my husband, earlier than expected. I froze, my heart sinking in an instant. I heard his footsteps approaching, and then a voice, calm but chilling. "What are you doing here?" His words weren't a question. They were an accusation. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just looked at me, and in that silence I knew he understood everything. Without another word, he turned and walked out, leaving me there, alone, suffocating in my guilt. Everything I had feared was now real. There was no turning back. He came back hours later, his presence hanging over me like a storm cloud. He didn't need to say anything. His eyes told me everything I had feared. He knew. All of it. I stood there, helpless, fumbling for words that couldn't undo what had already been done. "I didn't mean for it to happen," I said, but the words sounded hollow even to me. He didn't respond. His silence was more crushing than any shout. I could feel the weight of his disappointment, the way it seeped into every corner of the room. He didn't look at me with anger. It was something worse, something deeper. He was done. "I can't do this anymore," he finally said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. I opened my mouth to say something, to apologize, but it was too late. He had already made up his mind. As he turned to leave, I felt it, the finality of it all. Everything was slipping through my fingers. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from my best friend. She knew too, and she couldn't forgive me. I had lost her as well. He walked out, and with every step I felt something inside me crumble. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving me in the hollow silence of an empty house. I stood there for what felt like hours, unable to move, unable to breathe. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, but none of them mattered anymore. It was over. He was gone, and no matter how many times I replayed the words, there was no undoing it. I sat down on the couch, staring at the walls that once felt like home but now felt cold, unfamiliar. I thought of him, the young man, the one who had once made my heart race. But even he was slipping away, leaving me with nothing but the weight of my choices. He was moving on, living his life, and I was left here, frozen in the same place I had started. There would be no fresh start, no redemption, no chance to fix anything. I had lost it all. My husband, my best friend, and the future I had once thought was mine. I had made my bed, and now I would have to lie in it, forever haunted by the choices I couldn't take back.